Staff, Indian Navy, it is indeed my honor and privilege to welcome the visiting chiefs of navies, their representatives, and heads of delegations from across the Indian Ocean region to the 4th edition of the biennial Goa Maritime Conclave 2023. As you are aware, the Indian Navy has been hosting this conclave with the aim of strengthening maritime partnerships and friendly relations with Indian Ocean region littoral countries. There is no doubt that a free, open, and peaceful rules-based order is in all our interests, our collective prosperity and growth. This edition of the conclave is being attended by 13 countries, including Bangladesh, Comoros, India, Indonesia, Madagascar, Malaysia, Maldives, Mauritius, Myanmar, Seychelles, Singapore, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. We are extremely grateful to our guests for gracing this occasion. The theme for this year's conclave is Maritime Security in the Indian Ocean region, converting common maritime priorities into collaborative mitigating frameworks. With this background, I would commence the proceedings by first inviting on stage Vice Admiral M.A. Humpy Holy, Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief, the Southern Naval Command, to deliver the welcome address.
Mr. Mohammad Ali Yusufa, the Defense Minister of Comoro, Admiral R. Hari Kumar, the Chief of the Naval Staff, our chiefs from the foreign navies and other maritime forces, heads of delegations, members of delegations from our neighboring countries, former chiefs of naval staff present here, commanders-in-chief, our esteemed guests, distinguished panelists, friends from the academia, members of the media, officers, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my proud privilege this morning to deliver the welcome address on this 4th edition of the Goa Maritime Conclave, which has matured very quickly over the years and has acquired the status of a key regional maritime dialogue. Your presence, I would like to first welcome our chiefs of the foreign navies and their representatives and the delegations who have come along far and wide to be present here this morning for the conclave. Your presence here amidst us strengthens the bonds of friendship between our nations and binds them together just as much as our forces do. As friends and partners in a shared seascape, I think collectively we can work for a better future, which is reflected very aptly in the theme of India's G20's presidency, which signifies, and the motto is Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which signifies one earth, one family, one future. I would like to extend a warm welcome to Admiral Arun Prakash, who will be delivering the conclave address, as also to the esteemed speakers of this conclave. I would like to welcome the speakers, Dr. Manimuthu Gandhi, who is the Vice President of the Indian Society of International Law, Mr. Anil Kumar Singh Deep, the Commissioner of Police, Mauritius Police Force, Professor Harsh V. Pant, the Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy of the Observer Research Foundation. First Admiral Dr. Te Yap Leong, who is the Senior Director of the Malaysian Institute of Defense and Security. Vice Admiral A.K. Chawla, Emeritus Resource Faculty of the Rashtriya Raksha University at Gandhinagar. Rear Admiral Khalid Iqbal, who was the former VC of the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Maritime University. Professor Varun Sani of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Captain Kin Zaw, who is the Deputy Commander of the Naval Training Command of Myanmar Navy. They are here to share their perspectives on maritime security in the IOR, and we look forward to learning from them. I would also like to extend a very hearty welcome to Vice Admiral Ashok Kumar, the National Maritime Security Coordinator, to Admiral Aurangzeb Chaudhry, the former Chief of the Bangladesh Navy. I would like to welcome Admiral Thisara Samarasinghe, who was the former Sri Lankan commander, as also Admiral Karambir Singh, the former Chief of Naval Staff, and the President NMF, who will be moderating today's discussions during the conclave. Over the past 6 years, since the inaugural edition of Goa Maritime Conclave in 2017, this conclave has established itself as a forum for fostering collaborative thinking, develop mutual understanding, and harness maritime thought so as to identify the ways and means for addressing collectively the maritime security challenges, not only of today, but also those of tomorrow. There is little doubt that this conclave has a pivotal role to play in strengthening cooperation and for ensuring our collective future. Through cooperative and collaborative measures, collectively we can play a far greater role not only in strengthening security, but also in facilitating unhindered trade, economic prosperity, and more importantly, the very well-being of our people, of the collective. The third edition of the Goa Maritime Conclave, which was conducted in November 2021, culminated with the adoption of a declaration of common maritime priorities. This augurs well because it contributes to an outcome-oriented agenda for this conclave. As a precursor to this conclave, the Goa Maritime Symposium 2022, which was a working level feeder event for this conclave, was conducted in October last year. The theme for the fourth edition of the Goa Maritime Conclave is Maritime Security Challenges in the IOR, converting common maritime priorities into collaborative mitigating frameworks. Now, this theme is extremely important because as we move towards the first quarter of the 21st century, the maritime domain is becoming increasingly complex, competitive, and challenging. With the oceans being global commons to be used for global good, India and the Indian Navy stand committed in ensuring the safety, security, and the maritime management, not only of India, but that of our maritime neighbors. And this is in keeping with the vision enunciated by our Honorable Prime Minister of Sagar, which is security and growth for all in the region. With the IUR becoming a locus of the 21st century strategic seascape, if I may call it, we are confident that this conclave will foster a shared understanding of the complex challenges of this seascape and would also provide an opportunity to arrive at a common regional perspective. We are certain that the deliberations in the ensuing 2 days, in line with the theme, will result in tangible outcomes and key takeaways. Thank you, Shona Varun, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the conclave address of the Goa Maritime Conclave 2023. For delivering this address, we are indeed privileged to have amongst us Admiral Arun Prakash, who is a former Chief of the Naval Staff. I now invite Admiral Arun Prakash on the stage to deliver the conclave address.
Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Hari Kumar, Defense Minister of the Republic of Comoros, distinguished chiefs of friendly neighboring navies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by adding my own greetings and welcome to our guests to this unique gathering of the Indian Ocean Maritime Fraternity. I feel privileged to have been asked to address this assembly of illustrious naval leaders and heads of maritime agencies. I would like to compliment our chief for having envisaged a theme for this year's conclave, which is not only appropriate, but also relevant to the turbulent times that we live in. Today, no matter which way we look, the global situation presents a grim prospect. While sanguinary conflicts continue to rage across the Ukraine and the Middle East, there are many other hot spots too. For example, in Nagorno-Karabakh, in South Sudan, in West Africa, and in the South China Sea, any of them could flare up into conflagrations at short notice. I mention this gloomy scenario, ladies and gentlemen, only to highlight our own good fortune in inhabiting a region of relative calm in this tempestuous world. But peace must never be taken for granted. And this reality should encourage us to undertake collective efforts for ensuring continued tranquility in our own region. The countries represented here range from island nations and city-states to archipelagos and subcontinents. We may follow diverse methods of governance and even differ in our political beliefs, but we are bound together in friendship by the waters of the Indian Ocean. Named Bahar al-Hind by the Arabs, this ocean has carried religions, cultures, languages, traditions, and people across thousands of miles, thus creating relationships that actually transcend nationalities. As the inheritors of a common ancient maritime legacy, we must never forget that colonialism prevailed only because we failed to accord the importance to maritime security and left our shores open to foreign incursions. Even in the post-colonial era, the level of intra-regional trade and political interaction amongst Indian Ocean nations has remained unfortunately low. We have invariably gone beyond the region to seek economic and political partnerships. We've also hesitated to identify common interests and to create an environment of mutual interdependence. That is why we still have gaps in the regulatory and legal frameworks for achieving maritime security in the Indian Ocean. While littoral states may have adequate national maritime laws and regulations, they often differ from state to state and are often at variance with international laws and conventions. This can make it difficult for national maritime agencies to cooperate and to effectively coordinate their efforts. Moreover, enforcement mechanisms are often weak in some of our countries, and some of the emerging threats like cybercrime, maritime terrorism and human trafficking are not addressed adequately by existing laws. As maritime neighbors, we must remember that assurance of security and prosperity only for some nations would foster anxiety amongst others. No nation, big or small, can hope to prosper in isolation, leaving friends and neighbors behind. Inclusivity is therefore vital, and as pointed out by the CNC just now, India's Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, encapsulated this thought when he announced in 2015 that we seek a future for the Indian Ocean that ensures security and growth for all in the region. And this phrase has been created into an acronym, SAGAR, which also stands for the seas in Hindi. So this has now become a foreign policy watchword in New Delhi. So while our Navy, the Indian Navy, is ever ready, willing and able to be an assured security partner for our neighbors, there remain many lacunae in the context of current maritime security challenges that need to be addressed. Let me highlight a few specific examples. Piracy, to start with, may have declined in recent years off the coast of Somalia, but it still remains a potential threat in other areas. Armed robbery is also a problem, with growing number of attacks being experienced by ships carrying oil and other valuable cargoes. The existing legal frameworks for combating piracy may be adequate, but there is a need to improve coordination between littoral states as far as law enforcement at sea is concerned. Then we come to illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. And as we know, it's a major problem in our region, with billions of dollars worth of illegal catch depleting fish stocks. Here again, a lack of harmonized laws and regulations as well as weak enforcement has led to overfishing and a negative impact on food security and the livelihoods of fishing communities. Thirdly, terrorism, often with maritime connotations, has unfortunately become endemic in our region. We've seen its different manifestations in the 1988 coup in the Maldives, the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, and the 2019 Colombo Easter bombings. The line between terrorism and transnational crime is also getting blurred as groups like Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and the Boko Haram form a nexus with drug trafficking and human smuggling outfits. Lack of a regional framework for combating maritime terrorism and transnational crime again remains a hindrance to combating this menace. In recent memory, ladies and gentlemen, there have been a number of episodes in our region which should serve as reminders not only of the ever-present prospect of disasters at sea, but also of the dire need for multilateral action. Let us recall the 2004 Great Asian Tsunami, the 2014 search for Malaysian flight MH370, the marine pollution incidents which took place off Mauritius and Sri Lanka in 2020, and the sad loss of Indonesian submarine Nanggala in 2021. Given the magnitude of effort as well as the capabilities and expertise required, these tasks would have been beyond the capacity of any single nation. But fortunately, many nations came forward to help, and this display of cooperative effort should become a template for teamwork amongst all our navies. Since our dependence on the seas forms a natural lever for collective endeavors, our navies can consider a number of steps to convert common maritime priorities into collaborative mitigating frameworks. These could include, firstly, sharing of information on maritime threats and incidents in real time, a good example of which is the Gurgaon-based Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region. It has national liaison officers from 12 partner countries, and states can share information on maritime activity, especially any threats that may be about to emerge. Secondly, strengthening of maritime law enforcement capabilities through training assistance, which is going to be discussed in subsequent sessions, capacity building, developing common operating procedures for maritime law enforcement. Then developing harmonized laws and regulations on maritime security issues to enable cooperation and coordination between national agencies. And lastly, developing new legal frameworks and strategies to address emerging maritime security threats such as cybercrime, maritime terrorism, and human trafficking, which I just mentioned. So, ladies and gentlemen, the seas do not just make us all neighbors, they also provide unlimited prospects for navies to work together in a common cause. We must therefore grasp every opportunity to convert challenges into opportunities for cementing friendship, cooperation, peace, and tranquility. Let me conclude by wishing this conclave a fruitful and enriching series of talks and deliberations over the next 2 days. I am confident that in the process of formulating new strategies and protocols, you will also reinforce the bonds of trust, friendship, and cooperation that exist between our navies. Thank you for your attention. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. As a token of our appreciation, may I now request the Chief of the Naval Staff, Indian Navy, to present the conclave memento to Admiral Arun Prakash. Thank you, sirs. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the stage is set for commencement of today's deliberations. The deliberations are spread over 4 sessions. The first session is on the topic identifying gaps in regulatory and legal frameworks for achieving maritime security in the Indian Ocean region, including frameworks for possible regional conventions and agreements. I request our 3 panelists to come up on stage. Professor Manimuthu Gandhi, Vice President, Indian Society of International Law. Mr. Anil Kumar Singh Deep, Commissioner of Police, Mauritius Police Force. And Vice Admiral G. Ashok Kumar, the National Maritime Security Coordinator of India. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will be moderated by Vice Admiral G. Ashok Kumar. The Admiral, prior to his retirement, was the Deputy Chief and Vice Chief of the Naval Staff, Indian Navy, for over 5 years from 2016 to 2021. In his distinguished naval career of 40 years, he has held various challenging staff and command appointments. He has immensely contributed to the Indian Navy and foreign maritime cooperation, one of the important initiatives being the launch of the Information Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region. Currently, he is the National Maritime Security Coordinator of India. I request the Admiral to take over and conduct the proceedings, sir.
Honorable Defense Minister of Comoros, Admiral Hari Kumar, Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Arun Prakash and Admiral KB, distinguished guests, heads of various maritime forces from across the Indian Ocean region, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here and for this very important topic of identifying gaps in regulatory and legal frameworks for enforcing maritime security in the Indian Ocean region, including frameworks for possible regional conventions and agreements. So, let me just briefly introduce this topic. You all are aware, this audience needs no introduction to the fact that about 80% of global trade is maritime in nature. And therefore, there is a direct linkage between maritime security and national prosperities of all of us, all our nations. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. And yet, the nature of maritime domain is such that it is easy for non-traditional threats to thrive in these waters. Now, so as our forces deploy out at sea to deal with these non-traditional threats to maritime security, there is a need for a clear understanding of what the law says. Does the law actually enables our operations or do they come as a hindrance? This is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, UNCLOS, if you were to look at UNCLOS as a constitution of the oceans. It is in fact a compromise, actually, if you see, between mare liberum, or the free seas or the open seas, and the rights of coastal states, especially when it comes to exploiting resources within various maritime zones of our nations. So not only does the impact of the force or the force of the maritime law decrease with increasing distances from the coastline, but actually if you were to look closely at the UNCLOS, even the manner in which it deals with various threats varies. So this can also be a challenge for each one of us. There is a vast disparity in that. Now, if you look at freedom accorded to warships for boarding vessels at sea, there are just 5 specific threats for which we are authorized to board. One of them, of course, is piracy, you'll know. The other one being slave trade. The other one being, I think, flagless states or a stateless vessel. And illegal broadcasting and things like that. So this kind of a restriction imposes a huge challenge to security forces operating out at sea. Now, when you take the case of piracy, there is universal jurisdiction that UNCLOS gives. And this actually strengthens the forces. But same is not the case in the case of drug peddling or arms running or other security threats. For instance, if you were to run into a vessel which is peddling drugs or involved in gun running, even within our own respective EEZs, and if our warship were to interdict them, it doesn't give you permission to board. It's very unfortunate. And so these are the kind of gaps that our security forces need to deal with. Now here, the interesting fact is that for all such cases, the UNCLOS recognizes the flag state jurisdiction. Now, if you look at the increasing number of ships that are flagged by flags of convenience, and the states which are doing these flags of convenience have got no interest either in the owner or the crew or the cargo, in fact. So why would they ever be interested? So actually the man who suffers or the country that suffers as the customer or the trade's origin or the end point is not even involved, or where the threat has been caught. So these are the gaps that we need to keep in mind while dealing with UNCLOS. There are a lot of other things. So I mentioned about these 5 instances where ships are authorized to board. So how do nations deal with it? We all know of interesting examples out at sea of ships just boarding suspicious vessels on the stateless vessel clause. I mean, this just uses a ruse. We all are aware of that. And second way of dealing with that is that countries actually enter into some kind of an agreement with the flag states so as to allow them faster approvals for boarding them. Like I'm sure you all are aware as to how the United States Navy has entered into some 40 different agreements, 40 different countries for boarding them, for approvals to come within 4 hours. So this is something that even the GMC countries can look at. Surveys in the EEZ, the UNCLOS says that you apply for survey in somebody else's EEZ, and if a no does not come from that country within 4 months, it's taken as concurrence. So is that acceptable? And we all are aware as to how some of these countries use such clauses. I mean, I can go on and on. IUU threat was mentioned about Admiral Arun Prakash as well. There are regional fisheries maritime organizations set up. Out of the 27 of them worldwide, 2 of them are in the Indian Ocean region. One is the COFA, which is in the southern Indian Ocean, and the other is the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, IOTC. And yet, the challenge is in proving. The burden of proof is actually on us, who's kind of the affected party when it comes to IUU. So what can we collectively do? I mean, there are lots more I'm sure the speakers will speak about, and for which I've got 2 very, very eminent speakers, and the first of whom is Dr. Manimuthu Gandhi. He is Vice President of Indian Society of International Law. And the second speaker is the Commissioner of Police, Mauritius Police Force, Mr. Anil Kumar Dip. So I will hand over to them, and it is 15 minutes per speaker. And if I have your permission, I'll just indicate you when you cross 13 minutes so that we stick to time. And thereafter, I'll open up for the question answer session. Thank you very much.
I've just taken the liberty of just mentioning the names and not reading out the bio because the bios have been distributed and I'm sure you would have gone through very highly impressive bios of both these gentlemen. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. I deem it a honor and privilege to speak before the naval heads of the different countries and the naval officers of this country. And now I'm going to deal with the challenges of existing legal framework to deal with existing maritime security challenges. There are two existing comes here and two challenges are comes here. If you just, take it out, you can say that there is a challenge in the law itself and there is a challenge in the law enforcement also. So precisely I'm going to deal with that. The maritime security legal regimes outlined. And this moderator was so nice because he just taken up the part of my job very easy. The Law of the Sea Convention and Clause 3, it is called that Constitution of the Oceans today. And the second is other legal instruments of maritime crimes. And maritime security law involves both the multilateral and bilateral legal regimes directed at eliminating crime in the global commons, coupled with the convention, other legal instruments such as the suppression of unlawful acts at sea, SUA Convention, and the PSI, but the PSI initiative was by US, and organizations like the International Maritime Organization, they are mainly concentrating on the safety. So it is difficult to address full scope of illicit activity as it often follows legal trade and co-opts technology, modalities and methods employed by the marine industry to achieve efficacy and reduce risk. Hence, the range of legal regimes and institutions required to degrade the capacity of criminal organization to operate with immunity. The idea is, whenever we say something illegal and that approach and method is licit method, so we have to be very careful on that. What are all the other legal instruments? Critical role of various UN instruments besides Law of the Sea Convention are the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocols, the Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances, and the Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Maritime Navigation, then 1988 Protocol of then SUA. So then, the safety of fixed platform located on continental shelf, that another thing. Then 2005 protocols which broadly establish the framework for collaboration between state parties. So these are all the wide legal frameworks we have. But the enforcement is a major problem because this was explained by the moderator also. Because we have jurisdiction at the end clause. One is the port state jurisdiction, the other one is flag state jurisdiction, yet another one is the coastal state jurisdiction. Now the jurisdictions, law is not clear in many countries. If they have even the laws, the point is that the law is not consistent with the UNCLOS. That is a major problem. Then, a common interest in maritime security forms the basis of comprehensive approaches to international security. With regard to seas, this may require rethinking of shared and exclusive interests because no single nation has the sovereignty, capacity, or control over the assets, resources, or venues from which the transnational threats endanger global security. So without coordination and cooperation, nothing would be, solved here. The problem cannot easily be met. Operationally, states striving to enforce the national laws and the convention are challenged not by large navies, but by the threat of non-state actors seeking to exploit oceans either for financial gain or the illegal, the legal pretext, but they will come normally, the legal way. Induction of fear for political gain or to support criminal enterprises. These threat challenges exist. Interpretation and application of international law would also present an opportunity for an improved understanding of maritime security. No settled definition on maritime security. You have this UN annual resolution, what is stated about maritime security. The above definition is, it is the state definition, it is a UN definition.
And every state will have, try to define its own maritime security. So the UN annual resolution says that maritime security is about addressing illicit traffic in arms and weapons of mass destruction, illicit traffic of narcotics, psychotropic substances, and smuggling of trafficking of persons by sea as threats in shipping companies, militaries, and law enforcement. Maritime security challenges in IOR. So what's happening here? The IOR is riddled with multiple security challenges across the spectrum of threats, which range from traditional state-on-state conflicts. I'm not going to deal with that because you are the better people to deal with that. There is a legal regime to deal with that. And to non-traditional threats emanating from non-state actors or those sponsored by states without their active involvement. Many of these threats manifest under the rubric of maritime security challenges. Today it is a major challenge. The Indian maritime doctrine terms IOR as this hotbed of international crime while simultaneously highlighting other threats such as maritime terrorism, national disaster, and territorial disputes. Now, traditional and non-traditional security threats, state-on-state conflicts. I told you, I did that very clearly that I am not going to deal with that. Because the emerging threats are more like a soft one that are non-state actors or sponsored non-state actors. Now, non-traditional security threats, one is drug trafficking, trafficking in human beings, IUU fishing, and in fact, it represents an estimated 15 to 30% of the global catch, trafficking in small arms, WMD. Then hybrid maritime threats we have. One is the cyber security threats. Second is even the cables are targeted by cyber attacks. Because the laying of the cable is in fact, it is permitted under customary international law. But once you lay the cable, now today what happens is, and the cables are targeted by cyber attacks very easily. So oil spillage and environmental crimes including poaching, these are all hybrid maritime threats. Then what is the issue here? There are three important principles from UNCLOS or the customary international law, and three principles which have been evolved over the years, about 500 years, and all these things are restated in UNCLOS now. At the time they negotiated, 14 years negotiation, and they gave the convention in 1983, and when they gave the convention, what was the knowledge available at that particular point of time, they took into consideration. But at the same time, they don't want to change the age-old principles because that was favorable to Western powerful navies in those days. So what happened is that the boarding becomes a problem because only the selected area boarding is permitted. It is a narrow gap it is permitted. And with the result, that the navies, their hands are tied here. You look here, the law regarding maritime security operations are premised on the notion of universality of crime, that illicit activity conducted on the high seas is contrary to good order and innate freedom of the sea under international law. Notably, if reasonable suspicion of specific illicit activity as enumerated in Article 110 of the Convention is acted upon through a boarding, but the suspicious are unfounded and no illegal activity is discovered, the ship visited is entitled to compensation for any loss or damage. So if you don't have intelligence information and you are at fault and you are in fact liable. Now, the collective policing, collaborative approach. As the high seas fall outside the jurisdiction of the single state and are collectively policed by all states through international law, a collaborative approach must be taken to address crime occurring at sea or crime carried out through use of the maritime domain. Piracy and illicit trafficking of narcotics, human and weapons comprise the main varieties of transnational crime addressed in the Convention. Article 110 discusses the customary rule of warships may exercise, approach and visit on the high seas of any ship that is suspected of piracy, human trafficking, unauthorized broadcasting, is without nationality, or through flying a foreign flag or refusing to show its flag, the ship is in reality of the same nationality or the warship. Very limited. You can't just get in there without all these things. You must be very sure that it is involved. Only place where the freedom is given is piracy because it is a universal jurisdiction. And otherwise, the ship must have first authority under national law. That national law, whatever is there, it must be in consonance with international law. If it is not there, there is going to be a problem. Then Article 111 addresses the right of hot pursuit, allowing warships of one state to follow a ship through the different maritime zones if that ship is suspected of illegal activity. Now here also there is a curtailment. You can go only up to the territorial sea of other state unless and until it is extended in case of emergency by Security Council resolution. That has happened in piracy in Somalia, where they extended. Then drug trafficking. Article 108 requires member states to cooperate, empowers them to offer assistance in suppression of drug trafficking, especially addressing other state flagged vessels. Traditionally, drug traffickers used overland routes, but in the last 20 years, they have shifted transportation west into the Pacific Ocean and east into the Atlantic Ocean. The majority of this trafficking has traditionally been in the littoral regions and often with territorial waters. Now it is just moving to, in fact, the blue water because, they have more access. Then piracy and armed robbery. So I need not explain any further that the piracy, we have a definition, but the definition is unworkable definition because the definition that occurs in the UNCLOS now, it needs first two vessels, that then there must be a private tense, that reference is there. And most importantly, this definition is non-workable for another reason that now without even some pirate entering into the ship can be attacked by a cyber attack. There is no need for pirate to be there. But if that kind of a situation arises, your definition cannot do anything. See, we are contemplating about 10 years or more to have a legislation on piracy, and 2-3 drafts we made it. Finally, in India, we have a present draft that has been made as an act and that has come into force in February. So the acts, piratical acts are sophisticated, and the slavery and trafficking in human beings, another important thing. The visiting vessels on the high seas only has responsibility to report slavery. They can't do anything with that because you can't. So the problem always with the first thing that the search, seizure and boarding. This is a problem by ships. Now the same thing happens in the the trafficking and the small arms and WMD. Now, new technologies to counter organized crime. I told you that, the cyber crime and the new technology is this automated system where, you have crawlers and other things. Through deep sea, you can do so many things here because you see that usage of conventional military measures like rockets, missiles and artillery shelling, these are all used by piracy and armed robbery purpose. It is no longer a traditional thing. So things become very difficult today. So the enforcement is difficult. The Law of the Sea Convention provides a strong framework, and multilateral efforts to defeat criminal activity in all maritime zones will result in more secure, safer operating environment for all. However, recurrent difficulty in successfully prosecuting, punishing wrongdoers, whether engaged in piracy, human trafficking, or remainder, that much remains to be done. Now, what is the reason? One is the outdated provision. Second, the freedom of the sea. Third, flag state control of the vessel. Law enforcement, boarding, searching, and seizure is provided by very restricted situation. National legislation is non-existent in certain countries to deal with enforcement. Criminal acts are committed as if they look like illicit act. In fact, drug smuggling and other things, which in fruits and other places, you can find that it is in fact done. So the symbiotic relationship between acts of terrorism, drug trafficking and arms smuggling, involvement of foreign non-state actors and economic resources support from outside the Indian Ocean region, that is very important reason. Then we need new agreements to fill the gaps, and cooperation between Coast Guard and Navy, collaboration with regional navies, legal capacity building, intelligence data sharing with regional law enforcement institutions. collaborations and cooperation in law enforcement through bilateral regional organizations like IOR, PIMSTEC, ASEAN, etc., then mutual legal assistance agreements. Thank you very much.
Votre Excellence, le ministre de la Défense des Comores, Admiral Hari Kumar, Chief of Naval Staff, Indian Navy, Chief of Navy, Defense Forces, heads of delegations, esteemed panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, bonjour, aap sabko mera pranam. It is with great humility that I join this distinguished set of panelists to engage in the vital discourse surrounding our maritime domain. It is indeed an honor to be here and having the opportunity to share and discuss the challenges and opportunities that define our maritime world. I am excited to both contribute as a panel member and to learn from the profound wisdom that you all will bring to this forum. The Indian Ocean historically has been a hotspot for geopolitical maneuvering, and even today remains vital for global powers to assert influence and protect interests. Often termed as the ocean of the future, it is a crucial player in the global economy and geopolitics, connecting trade partners, aiding commerce, and serving as an energy transit hub. Despite its economic importance, the Indian Ocean grapples with various security threats, including piracy, illegal fishing, terrorism, organized crime, imperiling commerce, seafarers, and the environment and regional stability. Today, maritime security has gained global attention, and Mauritius, strategically positioned in the Indian Ocean, is facing numerous maritime challenges. The safety and stability of the Indian Ocean region is integral to Mauritius' prosperity and security, necessitating collaboration from Indian Ocean rim countries. To address these challenges, the international community has established a framework of organizations and agreements designed to ensure maritime security and safety in the Indian Ocean. However, this framework, while well-intentioned, faces numerous challenges and gaps that hinder its effectiveness. So without any further ado, I would directly dive into listing the various regulatory and legal gaps that undermines the security in the Indian Ocean region. Firstly, there is no comprehensive regional agreement organization exclusively dedicated to Indian Ocean maritime security, hindering effective responses to emerging and evolving threats. While various regional bodies, such as the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, and agreements like Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia exist, but they do not have the necessary legal and operational mechanisms to address evolving security challenges effectively. Secondly, I would like to shed light on a pressing global issue of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which threatens maritime ecosystems and global fisheries sustainability. Some nations face regulatory gaps and enforcement challenges in combating IUU fishing. Furthermore, the enforcement of existing fisheries regulations often falls short, primarily due to limitations in resources. In terms of area coverage, the geographic distributions of tuna and tuna-like species cover the Indian Ocean in its entirety, including both the high seas and EEZs. However, large tracts of the Indian Ocean region are not covered by any agreement other than the tuna fisheries covered by Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. Further, there are no regulatory arrangements for non-tuna-like and non-highly migratory species. There are significant areas in the northwest, northeast, southeast quadrants of the Indian Ocean basin that are not covered by the Southern Indian Ocean Fisheries Agreement or any other regional fisheries management type organizations which geographically base rule-making powers. Asia-Pacific Fisheries Commissions and the Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center cover Indian Ocean capture fisheries on the eastern side of the Indian Ocean. Their combined influence regarding high seas capture in and south of the Bay of Bengal is not a strategic priority for these organizations, nor do any of their decisions or recommendations provide binding or guiding substance in this domain. The absence of regulations for non-tuna species allows exploitation by some countries, particularly in squid fishing. Effective monitoring, control, and surveillance measures are vital, but all coastal nations face challenges in this regard. Thus, IUU vessels exploit surveillance weaknesses and offload catches in the ports with lax controls. Transshipment at sea complicates trafficking and tracking and enforcement, while forced vessels registration can enable IUU fishing. Finally, the potential gaps in the registration and identification processes that can lead to the use of false information, creating opportunities for IUU fishing operations to continue unchecked. Having covered IUU fishing, I would now like to dwell upon one of the most dangerous and grave menaces of maritime security in the Indian Ocean region, which is the surge in illegal drug trafficking through sea routes. The bane of drugs has become a major concern in our society, with a number of youths falling prey to this menace, aiding to social insecurities. Drug trafficking is further interlinked to maritime terrorism with huge profit margins. Drug trafficking is by far the most lucrative means of generating funds to fuel ever-growing terrorist activities and insurgencies around the region. With the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, intricate geography, porous borders, jurisdictional complexities, and the transnational nature of drug trafficking networks, law enforcement and regulation agencies face formidable obstacles. International legal frameworks for jurisdiction and extradition often do not align with the dynamic nature of drug trafficking, enabling drug traffickers to exploit legal gaps. The extraterritorial application of laws to combat drug trafficking faces uncertainties due to differing legal standards and penalties between countries. Also, agreements on interdiction and prosecution are not uniform between countries or universally accepted, contributing to regulatory gaps. Inadequate information sharing among countries of the Indian Ocean region impedes collaborative efforts against drug trafficking. Legal barriers to sharing sensitive information further complicate counter-narcotics operations. Ensuring vessels comply with international drug trafficking regulation, a principle known as flag state control, is challenging and lacks clear legal guidance, especially when dealing with certain so-called flags of convenience. Globally, with a huge increase in maritime traffic, there is also an increased susceptibility to various environmental challenges, such as oil spills and pollution. The MV Wakasho oil spill incident in Mauritius highlighted several legal gaps and challenges in the existing international maritime legal framework. These gaps and issues contributed to the complexity of the situation and the difficulties in addressing this environmental disaster. I would like to highlight some of the key legal gaps and challenges. To begin with, one of the significant legal gaps is the issue of environmental liability and compensation. In some cases, the existing legal framework does not adequately address the scale and extent of environmental damage caused by the oil spill. The ship owner's liability is capped at a certain amount, which is often insufficient to cover the full cost of the cleanup and long-term environmental restoration. The rise of such incidents also raises questions about the need and freedom of routing in any nation's territorial waters. Even when a ship is not destined for any port in that country, and another straight, economical and direct route is available while keeping clear of the territorial waters. This points to potential gaps in regulations covering vessel routes and navigations, which need to be addressed anew following the substantial rise in maritime traffic since the times of UNCLOS was formulated. Such incidents also raises questions about the responsibilities of ships owners, salvage operators, and other concerned authorities in preventing or mitigating environmental damage in the event of a vessel grounding. Recent such incidents at sea have additionally underscored a troubling trend concerning the professional competence of watchkeepers on both merchant ships and other commercial boats and vessels. Some watchkeepers appear to be inadequately prepared for the immense responsibility that comes with navigating into open seas. The issues of maritime terrorism and piracy in the Indian Ocean are profound challenges that have persisted over the years, threatening the safety and security of this vital maritime region. To effectively combat these threats, we must address the numerous legal and regulatory gaps that undermine our collective efforts. One of the primary legal and regulatory gaps concerns the prosecution and adjudication of suspected pirates and terrorists. When pirates are apprehended, the process of bringing them to justice is often hindered by complexities and disparities in international laws. The evolving landscape of maritime terrorism is witnessing a surge in the new form of warfare, that is the grey zone warfare, where non-state actors operate within ambiguous legal and regulatory frameworks, exploiting the vulnerabilities of sea. In the Indian Ocean region, there is no unified definition of what constitutes maritime illegal immigration, leading to varying interpretations across nations. As a result, the legal response to this issue can be inconsistent and lack a standardized approach. Specific to human trafficking, while there are international agreements such as the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, there remains a gap in the coordination and enforcement of this agreement across the Indian Ocean. The lack of uniformity in domestic legislations related to human trafficking can lead to inconsistencies in prosecution and hinder efforts to combat this heinous crime effectively. To bridge these legal and regulatory gaps, we must advocate for greater regional collaboration and adherence to international agreements. The implementation of a standardized definitions and legal framework for maritime illegal immigration and human trafficking, as well as the establishment of stronger cross-border cooperation mechanisms, will be crucial in addressing these pressing concerns. It is essential that we work together to protect the vulnerable, prevent exploitation, and uphold the principle of justice and human rights in the Indian Ocean. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both the speakers for an excellent presentation. Now I open the house to the audience. If you have any questions, please rise. The mic will come to you. Introduce yourself just with your name, the country, and your the job that you're doing. And let the questions be just one-liners. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lieutenant Commander Steve Smith. I'm the UK ILO at the Information Infusion Centre in Gurugram. We've heard about cooperation and collaboration, which of course is needed. We've seen so far we have CMF, we have EU NAVFOR, we have the IMSC in the Western Indian Ocean and Asian Gulf. Do you think there is a need for a similar organisation in the Indian Ocean region, in the eastern side maybe, or central and southern parts of the Indian Ocean? We've seen how successful those organisations have been suppressing piracy. Now they've moved on to suppressing terrorism, drug trafficking, and that kind of thing. I'd like your thoughts on that, please.
You get the question? No, can you just ask again and keep the mic a little closer?
Just talking about collaboration and cooperation. We've seen how successful existing organisations such as CMF, IMSC, and EU NAVFOR have been in suppressing piracy off the Horn of Africa, and how they've moved on to counter-terrorism operations, maritime security operations, but they only operate in the western part of the Indian Ocean region. Do you think there's a similar need for a similar organisation in the central and eastern parts of the IOR? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I understand your question is that there are these multilateral constructs which are operating in the western, northwestern IOR. Is there a need for such a one in the rest of the region, correct? Okay. Now, I really think that will be determined by whether there is a need. I mean, the threat levels are that high that requires a multilateral approach. Of course, there is. In fact, this whole meeting is towards deciding what can we do collaboratively to address the non-traditional threats to maritime security. If you just look to our east, in the Malacca Straits, the three littorals, combined with Thailand in the case of Ice Skies Patrol, I've been doing the Malacca Straits Sea Patrol because the safety and security of navigation through the Malacca Straits is so important to global economy. So there is definitely a requirement. So we are here to identify if there is any more that we can actually initiate. Thank you. Next. Admiral Chawla.
Thank you for excellent presentations. I'm Vice Admiral Chawla, retired. I just wanted to query the speakers on the issue of the suggested frameworks. We have identified the gaps in the legal frameworks, regulatory and legal frameworks, but could we dwell somewhat upon the frameworks that could be set up to mitigate these? Thank you.
Okay, so you mentioned about regional framework. Is there anything specific that you have in mind? I mean, we obviously can't be writing an UNCLOS for the region, but what is it that we can do?
So the idea is, I have identified three things. One is about the flag state, control over the vessel. We cannot change it because it is international law. And the second one is boarding. The boarding part, there can be a collaboration because whatever is given in the UNCLOS is very narrow boarding possibilities. But when states themselves agree on specific issues where the boarding is allowed, that can be worked. I think that kind of agreement are in vogue. And third important thing is about IUU fishing. The IUU fishing, in certain places it is very acute, in certain other places the problem is not so acute. And how it works, it is the regional organization because RFMO, they are controlling that. But RMOs are species related, most of the RMOs, and some of the RMOs are left out, certain species. Now those species are in danger and there is overfishing of that. If that is a possibility, I think, and fishing also, this particular area, which kind of fishing is so much threatened and targeted in the IUU fishing category, that can be identified and there can be a protocol that can be worked on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think good suggestion. Any other questions?
Good morning. I'm Rear Admiral Khalid, retired from Bangladesh Navy. Actually, we are aware that the UN has recently, a few months back, has brought into force about the High Seas Treaty. That is the treaty for ensuring the biodiversity of the areas beyond the national jurisdiction. How you think that is going to happen? Because we know that the environment, climate change, everything is part and parcel of the maritime security. How you really think that is going to have an impact? And how India is going to view that particular convention for the days ahead? Thank you.
So those who have seen the very negotiation of the BBNJ treaty, we call these IG treaties, and this treaty negotiation went on for 2 decades. And mostly it is the developing countries, they pushed for this kind of a treaty. When they pushed for it, originally, they wanted to get benefit out of the marine genetic resources. That was the intention. But when you negotiate, normally it is completely like a basket. You will have good as well as bad fruits on a negotiation. You can't reject it. So some other thing also got into that. That is very importantly that they can always go for it is integrated system. Now we have a sectoral approach for everything in Law of the Sea. Now they have an integrated approach for everything. That means, all the area will be decided for the conservation in a different manner. Now the important thing is that it will be beneficial, it doesn't affect the movement of the navies anymore because the coastal states as well as the nearest state needs to be, in fact, consented for that kind of a thing. Now it is only in the treaty, only 60 countries just signed it. And the second stage process, the ratification process should go on. I think by coming to force, it will take 10 years normally. If it is 10 years after that, what happens is that the maritime protected area they are suggesting there, that may cause some problem about the movement of the navies. If at that point of time, I think every state has to come to an agreement where maritime, protected areas, if those areas are to be adopted for conservation purposes, whether that would change the maritime security or safety. That should be looked into at that particular point of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? The Deputy Chief.
Morning, sir. I'm Vice Admiral Sopti, Deputy Chief of Naval Staff. One question for Professor Gandhi. As we all know that some of the conventions and even the treaties are voluntary in nature, and all countries may or may not adopt them. Do you think there is a way forward for encouraging or making it in some way possible for a large number of countries to adopt them, voluntary or involuntary, I don't know. And the second question for Mr. Anil Kumar Singh Deep, what do you think if in this regional area, if one country was to take the initiative to kind of draw up a framework for regional cooperation or any of the regulatory gaps that we have, who do you think would be more appropriate? Would it be a large country in the area? And in that case, do you think some of the smaller countries may feel threatened? Or do you think it is better for a smaller country to take the initiative and the other countries participate in that process?
Yeah. Now let me answer the first question first. Any treaty, when the national government identifies, acknowledges, and after that they decides to become a party, they are fully conversant of what are all the difficulties there. Then with all these things, they agree and become parties to a treaty. As I reflected some time back that in a treaty, some elements you may agree, some elements you may not agree. And the reason sometimes you are not going to ratify the treaty because of certain inconvenient provisions. So there could be a possibility of another protocol and agreement regionally where that inconvenient provisions can easily be omitted and the rest of them can be enforced. The idea here is when you have an international law, the public international law, especially like UNCLOS, nothing against the provisions of the UNCLOS, you can't enter into a treaty. That's all. As long as it is along with the UNCLOS, but the methodology would be a little different from that, and then you can always do that. This is the first answer to the first question. Second question, when a regional protocol or a treaty, every party in that area, they are treated to be equal, whether it is a powerful state or a powerless state, or a developed state or a developing state. But at the same time, mostly the capabilities of that state also must be looked into. There are two important capabilities. One is the capability to make that particular format is enforceable. And second is that that state would accommodate all the viewpoints of the states, even smaller states. If that kind of a thing is there, any treaty can be entered into regionally also. I think I answered your question, sir.
Would you like to add something? He's kind of answered the second one.
Of course, as rightly pointed out, it has to be a collaborative process and, of course, in line with the existing legal frameworks.
Okay, thank you. I hope that's the end.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank the speakers. I really think not only were your presentations outstanding, but even the manner in which all the questions were answered. But quickly, just to sum up, from all these questions that were asked by, I think, various members in the audience, the simple question is, are there GMC-specific multilateral solutions to unilateral problems that we face, when it comes to maritime law? That is what we should look at. So can the GMC collaborate better in identifying solutions to existing problems? Okay, there are a few things that were discussed. One is the legal framework. Like Dr. Manimuthu Gandhi brought out, obviously you cannot develop something which contradicts anything of the UNCLOS, because that's like the constitution of the ocean.
And even to have that passed, it'll be a challenge. I mean, we can see a number of regions in the world, they're trying to put together some kind of a code of conduct and so on and so forth. You see the problems, How does it apply to other countries who also use the seas, who are not probably part of the region at all? So these are things that we need to keep in mind. Regional agreements. I brought out the example of the United States having entered with some 40 different countries, the flag state jurisdiction, how approvals can come in faster. So if you run into a vessel, you find it is flagged in, say, country A, is it possible for us to quickly get across to that country and with an agreement which we have already entered into, get an approval within, say, 4 hours or so? Otherwise, we are just wasting our time. So, can such a regional agreement be there, at least to start with, between all the GMC nations, is something that we can consider. The other thing is, when we all ratified the UNCLOS, there was also a freedom for us to put in some declarations. And vast number of countries put in a couple of them. One was on, one doesn't apply to operations, but the second one was operating in somebody else's EEZ. India too put in that condition to say that we understand, it does not say we require permission, but the declaration was that we understand that the UNCLOS prohibits any military activities, especially with respect to weapon firings and so on, within the EEZ, within our EEZ. And lot of other countries have also done the same thing. So is there a need for, say, GMC countries to at least waive off that clause for each other? That means, can we not allow any GMC country to come into our EEZ if there is a requirement to check IUU fishing or to check drug peddling, gun running, or any of these non-traditional threats to maritime security, and similarly adopt that reciprocally too? So this is something that the GMC nations could consider. Joint focused operations. One way of overcoming this challenge of not being able to enter into somebody else's EEZ for checking any of these non-traditional threats to maritime security is to have joint focused operations. So why not, quite like the Indian Navy, I am aware, and the Coast Guard does joint EEZ patrols for a number of countries which are present here. And how it is done is that there are members of the other armed forces of the Coast Guard or the Navy which are embarked on board the Indian naval ship or the aircraft, and the EEZ patrols are carried out. So that actually overcomes the challenge of not being able to operate in somebody else's EEZ. So this is something that the GMC countries can look at and get into an agreement for joint focused operations. RFMOs, Dr. Manimuthu Gandhi, I think, brought out, and so did the police commissioner, to say that IUU is a huge challenge. And I must tell you that in BIMSTEC, we now have an experts group meeting on maritime security, and the BIMSTEC nations are already discussing as to the blank that exists in the Bay of Bengal when it comes to regional fisheries maritime organizations. And if we were to create an RFMO, I mean, it can't be limited to certain species of fishes. It will have to be IUU fishing across the board. And I must also tell you that conditionalities are not too strict enough to prevent IUU fishing, unfortunately. Because as I said, the burden of proof is actually on the country that suffers IUU fishing and not on the guy who is doing it. So these rules need to be kind of eased a lot. The understanding of maritime law as a subject with the naval and Coast Guard personnel who deploy, probably the Coast Guards are probably a little better. We quite often as operators think that, listen, don't tell me the law. I am here to do a job, let me do it. So there is, I think, a need for us to have a center of excellence on maritime law for GMC for a start. Okay, and the final thing that I would like to say is the IFC, Information Fusion Centers. There are many. I mean, there's a wonderful IFC at Singapore, which I have gone and visited myself. There is an IFC IOR, which has come up much later and which collaborates with many navies and the regional centers. And I really think the information sharing needs to go one step higher. Amongst the GMC nations, why should there be any restrictions on sharing any information? Vessels of interest, non-traditional threats to security, all of which we should be able to freely share, for which I think the GMC can set an example. White ships is just the starting point. And finally, we do have an UNCLOS group of friends. Over 100 countries are members of the UNCLOS group of friends. So why can't we have an UNCLOS GMC group of friends is something that we can consider.
Thank you all very much. I really think it's been excellent to hear presentations on maritime law and the question answers that were there. Thank you all very much, and thank you very much to the speakers.
I thank the moderator and the panelists for their thought-provoking insights and ensuing discussions. I now request Vice Admiral M.A. Hampi Holi, Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Southern Naval Command, to come up on stage and present mementos to our panelists. Professor Manimuthu Gandhi. Mr. Anil Kumar Singh Deep. And Vice Admiral G. Ashok Kumar. Thank you, sirs. May I request the panelists to take their seats in the audience. Our second session for the day is on formulation of common multilateral maritime strategy and operating protocols for GMC nations for collective mitigation of maritime threats and challenges in the Indian Ocean region. I now request the panelists for the next session to come up on stage. Professor Harsh V. Pant, Vice President, Studies in Foreign Policy at the Observer Research Foundation. Vice Admiral Dr. Taep Leong, Senior Director of Comprehensive Defense and Security Research Center at the Malaysia Institute of Defense and Security. And Admiral Aurangzeb Chaudhry from Bangladesh. Ladies and gentlemen, to moderate this session, we are honored to have Admiral Aurangzeb Chaudhry, who is a former four-star admiral and was the Chief of the Naval Staff of the Bangladesh Navy. The Admiral has also served as Chairman of the Board of Directors of 3 shipyards under the management of the Bangladesh Navy and a few commercial entities under the Navy Welfare Foundation. After retirement, he is now working as an independent director of One Bank PLC and as Chairman of the Audit and Risk Management Committee of the bank. Sir, I request you to take over and conduct the proceedings.
Defense Minister of Comoros, Admiral Hari Kumar, Chiefs of the navies and heads of delegation of various countries present here, former Navy chiefs, senior officials, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you, all of you. I am privileged and honored to be with you today for an hour or so. I shall moderate the sub-team 2, focusing on a topic of paramount importance, one that has far-reaching implications for the security and stability of the Indian Ocean region. We are here today to listen to the discussion entitled The Formulation of a Common Multilateral Maritime Strategy and Operating Protocols for the Nations Participating in the Goa Maritime Conclave. The goal is to collectively mitigate maritime threats and challenges in the IOR. In this session, there will be 2 speakers talking on 2 topics. The first speaker, Professor Harsh V. Pant, is Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy at the Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. He is a Professor of International Relations with King's India Institute of King's College, London.
He is also Director Honorary of Delhi School of Transnational Affairs at Delhi University. He will be talking on opportunities and challenges for developing common multilateral maritime challenges. And the second speaker, First Admiral Dr. Tae Yap Leong, Senior Director, Comprehensive Defense and Security Research Center at the Malaysian Institute of Defense and Security, Ministry of Defense. The Admiral will talk on enhancing maritime security, cooperation options for developing operating protocols. For clarity, ladies and gentlemen, let me mention some guidelines regarding the conduct of this session. The allocated time for each presentation, as has already been said, is 15 minutes. Speakers are requested to maintain the time strictly. I shall allot each speaker by ringing the bell once, 2 minutes before the end of the allocated time and twice after the time is over. On completion of both the deliberations, there will be 15 minutes interaction time for the audience to interact with the panelists. While asking question or making any comment, the members of the audience are requested to identify themselves and name the institution they belong to. The members of the audience are further requested to kindly focus their questions on the sub-theme and the topics of the session only, and the comments made, if any, are appropriate to the forum. Because of time constraint, please be judicious not to ask too long questions and make lengthy comment. Before I leave the stage for the speaker, let me give a brief introductory overview on today's session sub-theme. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian Ocean, often referred to as the cradle of globalization, has always been a hub of cultural exchange, trade, and prosperity. However, in the contemporary world, this region faces a multitude of threats and challenges that require a coordinated and collective approach. The nations participating in Goa Maritime Conclave, located strategically along the Indian Ocean, have a unique responsibility to ensure the peace and prosperity of this region. The question that naturally comes to mind is, why do we need a common multilateral maritime strategy? The answer lies in the diverse and complex nature of the threats and challenges faced in the Indian Ocean region. From piracy and illegal fishing to climate change and natural disasters, territorial disputes to maritime terrorism, the threats and challenges are multifaceted and transcend national boundaries. Such threats have the potential to disrupt regional stability, trade, and prosperity. Recognizing these challenges, the nations participating in the Goa Maritime Conclave have come together with the shared objective of fostering security, stability, and prosperity in the IOR. The formulation of a common multilateral maritime strategy and operating protocols for the Goa Maritime Conclave nations is an indispensable step towards addressing the myriad challenges facing the IOR. A common strategy would allow us to pool our resources and knowledge, enhance regional stability, and respond effectively to these challenges. To implement these strategies effectively, we require to develop operating protocols. This includes agreed upon rules of engagement, communication protocols, and mechanisms for dispute resolution. It is essential to enhance maritime security cooperation and explore the options for developing operating protocols in IOR. GMC nations should establish a framework for collective action that encompasses a wide range of issues, from information sharing to joint exercises. By pooling resources, intelligence, and expertise, common threats can effectively be countered. Through security cooperation, capacity building, economic development, environmental responsibility, and adherence to international law, we can collectively mitigate maritime threats and challenges. In doing so, we will safeguard our shared interest, protect our coastal communities, and ensure that the Indian Ocean remains a beacon of trade, culture, and connectivity. With this, ladies and gentlemen, let me end my short introductory brief and let us now listen to what our speakers would say as to how we can turn this vision into reality. Thank you. Let me now invite our first speaker to talk on opportunities and challenges for developing common multilateral maritime strategies. Let me welcome Professor Harsh V. Pant. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you, everyone, and let me start by thanking the organizers for having me here for this very interesting conversation on a very important topic. I feel a bit overwhelmed in talking to an audience that knows, I think, the subject much better than I do. But what I thought I would try to figure out in whatever time I have is to think about this issue in a slightly more conceptual manner, because I think the issues, as we heard, and as I see it, is remarkably similar to some of the conversations I think scholars, policymakers, observers of international relations are perhaps having in other domains. So let me invite you to think about the conversation on Indian Ocean region, opportunities, challenges, as a microcosm of perhaps what is happening in international relations more broadly. And I think earlier, when the discussion had started, the conversation started by I think one of the speakers talking about we live in quite extraordinary times. And that in some ways, those extraordinary times require the extraordinary challenges that we see today require perhaps to think in ways that allows us to, of course, to collaborate, but collaborate in ways that can respond to the challenges of our time. So how do we think about collaboration at a time of great fragmentation in the global order? How we think of collaboration at a time when existing institutional frameworks are collapsing under the weight of their own contradictions. So if something is not right in the global order, if something is not right with the way institutions have been created, then to think about creating new institutions at this particular time, I think forces us to rethink some of the assumptions that we have made about institutions per se. So, and that's, I think that's the journey which perhaps as some of us who are looking at Indian Ocean region, and we heard the discussion earlier about the contradictions, the challenges, even in international law, it seems across domains. Most of the institutions, excuse me, including in areas where we thought institutions should work, like health, World Health Organization, it was supposed to be a tier 2 security threat till a few years back, till COVID told us that it is a tier 1 security threat. But it was, WHO was supposed to work like a dream, because there were no problems in terms of collaborating on a second tier security issues. It was assumed that nations would come together and develop collaborative strategies. So I think sometimes when we make these assumptions about collaboration, we also have to go back and ask the question, collaborations, cooperative frameworks, in what context? The context, I think, is changing rapidly. And that context had to be kept in mind in the kind of collaborative strategies that we want to make going forward. Because I think the context that operated a few years back no longer operates today. And when we are looking at Indian Ocean, which several speakers have already described as, in fact, the locus of global politics in more ways than one. Therefore, it invites you to think what it means to be applying collaborative strategies at this particular juncture. The other issue that I want to flag is at the very beginning that while we are talking of Indian Ocean region and GMC nations pertain to that geography, but I think our geographical constructs are also changing. The idea of Indo-Pacific is very new, but that is an idea that is embedded today in most of the national security strategies that you see. So disjointedly looking at Indian Ocean may not deliver us the results. And I think that's the point again, at the very beginning I want to make, that when we are talking of extra-regional players, who are these extra-regional players? When we are today demanding or defining our own strategic space as the strategic space of the Indo-Pacific. So how do we think of Indian Ocean in that sense? When the geography itself is morphing into something that is, again, a response to some of the challenges that we face. With that, of course, Indian Ocean region has specific issues, specific challenges, and the community of nations that bind, that are together in this, that is reflected in some of those issues that I want to touch upon. Now, if you look at the major stakeholders, you have major stakeholders of all kinds here in the Indian Ocean. The GMC nations, of course, have a different vantage point. There are other actors who have extraordinary role in the way they look at Indian Ocean today. And I think the journey that India has taken, even in articulating Indian Ocean as a zone of peace, to today when we say Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, that journey itself tells you that the arc of India's own thinking on Indian Ocean is evolving rapidly, and therefore in some ways many of these actors that perhaps were not part of the Indian Ocean geography at a particular point in time today look at this and want to be engaged in that geography in more ways than one. Therefore, when we talk about stakeholders, who are the stakeholders we are talking about, and how we then shape our engagement amongst ourselves to allow these stakeholders also a role there. And of course, the economic significance is very well known. We know the trade volumes, we know resource role, we know blue economy issues in the region, and these aspects that have driven Indian Ocean and Indian Ocean community into making, into striving for collective responses to the challenges of these times. This, in some ways, once again, the economic significance leads you into what we today see as strategic significance, strategic competition, competition for influence, great power rivalry. Everything is embedded in the wider matrix of interstate relations today, and in some ways reflective of what is happening in the Indian Ocean region. We have talked of non-state actor threats, but non-state actor threats are increasingly embedded in the traditional security threats. So we are seeing almost a reversal of the arguments that were made a few years back. Non-traditional threats remain very important, but they are today embedded in the wider great power competition that globally we are witnessing. And of course, Indian Ocean is becoming a very important pivot around which a lot of this great power contestation is taking place. The other aspect here is, is how do we think about institutions? Multilateral institutions, multilateral frameworks themselves are undergoing a definitional change. So when we talk of collaborating, when we talk of coming together, when we talk of working together, what kind of strategies are we talking about? Are we talking about formal alliances, formal relationships, formal approaches, or are we talking of ad hoc coalitions, informal alliances, interest-based coalitions, which can come together depending on the domain, which I think has become the norm in recent years across the maritime space and beyond. So how do we think about security relationships, how we think of partnerships, how we think of multilateralism in and of itself is a fundamental question that I think we have to address before we move into the idea of that collaboration and multilateral frameworks will have to be articulated in a way that can respond to the challenges of our times. And of course, the range of maritime security threats that speakers have evaluated and articulated over the last hour or so. And they remain very potent, they remain very significant, and they remain in fact embedded again in the larger challenge of both prosperity and security that we face in the region. Now, when we look at the approach that countries have taken in terms of navigating these challenges, both traditional security threats as well as non-traditional security threats, we see India's approach. We have talked about Indian approach embedded within the wider framework of security and growth for all. We have also seen various other initiatives, whether it is in terms of multilateral frameworks, unilateral frameworks, whether in terms of initiating different kind of collaborations on domains and themes. But fundamentally what I think India has been able to do is to articulate a response to say that we cannot look security and development as two distinct sets of priorities, because ultimately, because of the very nature of the maritime space, they are embedded together. And much before this idea that the securitization of everything, the weaponization of everything that has been talked about, I think it was very clear in the maritime space that has always been the case. And therefore, thinking about this, what India can do and what India can do with other stakeholders has been an important part of conversation within India and India's engagement with the wider set of stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific. But beyond that, we have seen other actors also talking about how they have looked at, there are so many individual actors who have had their national strategies. We have seen some of them embedded within the larger Indo-Pacific framework. We have seen some of those actors articulating a response depending on their specific geographies like Indonesia has done. We have seen ASEAN itself looking at the Indo-Pacific in a certain way and therefore articulating its strategy. We have seen other regional players also making the same point. But ultimately, these are nationalist strategies. These are individual strategies. They allow a nation to articulate its own vision as to how it views this geography and its own role in that. And in some ways, that disjointedness comes across because we have been talking about, again, collaboration and multilateral and frameworks. But ultimately, the idea that regional coordination, regional cooperation is important, while embedded in many of these individual strategies, it has not been reflected in the way perhaps regions and geographies have responded to the challenges of our times. There is also, apart from individual strategies, we have regional organizations which have all played. We heard recently, we heard just in the last session about what BIMSTEC is doing in certain areas. We know ASEAN and other actors have also engaged in what perhaps how they view as wider set of maritime possibilities and priorities. And we have also seen the contestation in many of these organizations. We know that the platforms or the organizations, institutional frameworks that were created at a certain point in time are not working as effectively today as many had expected. And therefore, the challenges of internal disjointedness are again a reflection of the wider global contestation. It is a reflection of wider inability of institutions to map out today's challenges, but it is also a reflection of how far and how fast the world has changed, so that the institutional capabilities of many of these players have not been able to respond to those challenges. The reason I also talk about GMC in the same breath is I think this is also a reflection of a community of countries, a group of countries thinking aloud about the possibility of what perhaps can be done and how this can move into some greater collaboration in terms of thinking about effectively addressing some of these threats, about thinking about collective prosperity. We know that most of these questions about environment, maritime security, or economic prosperity are, these are common themes across the set of actors that are present in this room today. So I think in that sense, this forum provides an opportunity, as we have seen since morning, to think through some of the assumptions, again, about collaboration, about institutionalization, about what are the priorities, what priorities should be of this engagement. Now, I think in some ways it's pretty obvious that if you have different maritime strategies, if you have disjointed strategies, the challenges become very significant. You see that coming out in the way countries have moved forward, in the way the nature of the threat has changed, and the nations around the periphery of this critical geography have not been able to respond to some of these challenges. Some of the challenges have been better addressed, but I think if you look at the issues that whether there are wider geopolitical challenges, sovereignty-related challenges, resource-related challenges, all of these challenges preclude in some ways a collective response, and therefore the need to overcome these challenges becomes very strong, because I think all of these advantages that you think commonsensically would accrue, it would allow for those possibilities to emerge. Now, if you are thinking of how do you think about it, I think 2 or 3 things I would certainly mention apart from what is being mentioned here. Increasingly, even when we talk of trade and technology cooperation or cooperation among states today, trust has become a very important word. Trust-based collaboration, that only if countries have trust, political trust, will they move forward even with economic cooperation. And this is a very interesting paradigm shift that we are witnessing. When we were studying international relations, we were told if you trade more with each other, we will develop trust. Now it's the other way around. We are being told that, look, trust is an essential ingredient even if you want to trade with someone else. So I think trust-based partnerships are going to be critical. And therefore, what do? Do you put the cart before the horse or horse before the cart is an interesting question to ask. Should we build trust before going towards an institutionalized response, to cooperation? Or should we create institutions as used to happen in the past and think that eventually trust would develop? I think that binary, that question has to be front and center as we develop new collaborative measures to deal with particular challenges, domain-specific challenges, and in this context, of course, maritime challenges. Some of the successful examples of collaborations that we have seen in the past or that we have seen in international relations pertain to other geographies where in certain areas, certain platforms, certain institutions have done well. European Union, of course, was seen as an exemplar of interstate cooperation. We now know that it is facing a lot of challenges. We know that those challenges are pretty serious today for EU as well. What I think in IOR and the community of nations that surround IOR can learn from these examples are pretty specific. So if ASEAN has been able to prevent conflict, has a strong conflict management enterprise, we have seen European Union doing economic integration. We have seen African Union, for example, collaborating in certain security-related teams. Application in IOR, whether it is governance, conflict mitigation, economic prosperity, or security enhancement, I think they're pretty specific. And one can learn from other geographies while being true to the individualized nature of the challenges that IOR faces. And I think broadly I would end where I started, that if we are thinking about the emerging challenges in IOR, if we are thinking about the changing nature of the widespread geography and the institutional infirmities that embed those geographies, are we asking the right questions? Are we saying that the kind of institutions that we need to build today perhaps cannot be the reflection of the past? So what kind of institution building are we supposed to do? If we are saying that the balance of power realities are to be reflected in those considerations, are we saying that the trust-based initiatives need to be the core of the activity that regional cooperation should engender? Therefore, the questions that we are asking, both in terms of balance of power, both in terms of creating appropriate institutions, need to reflect the sensibilities and the sensitivities of the states involved of today. They cannot be a reflection of the questions and the answers that we were seeking, say, in 1980s and 1990s. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your very thought-provoking and enlightening presentation. That is generally the case whenever the academicians speak. Various important issues that you brought up and your suggestions are well noted and will definitely be taken care of by the concerned officials. Without further ado, and to be in sync with the time, let me welcome our next speaker, First Admiral Dr. Tae Yap Leong. Admiral, you have 15 minutes for presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for moderating these sessions. Good morning to admirals, head of delegations from IOR, distinguished guests. I'm indeed a great honor to be invited to share my views on the topic on the enhancing maritime security cooperations and options for development operating protocols. My topic will cover the following topics or scope of my presentations. And allow me to set the scene. The Indian Ocean region is a vast and strategical significant maritime domain that stretches from the eastern coast of Africa to the western shore of Southeast Asia and Australia. It is home to critical sea lanes, vital trade routes, and numbers of coastal nations, making it a hub for global economic activities, which was mentioned earlier in the other speakers. Set the background of this topic. IOR has been notorious for piracy, and also its international efforts have significantly curtailed the privacy in this area, and armed robberies against the ships at anchor in the ports remain an ongoing concern to everyone. So come to the maritime security challenges, which was covered by the previous speaker. I will just briefly mention. Maritime terrorism has emerged as a significant and evolving challenges in the IOR. This threat introduced a layer of complexity to maritime security efforts, necessitating to proactive measure to counter it. Illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing is a pervasive problem in the IOR, causing overfishing, depleting of fish stocks, and economy losses for coastal states. This issue not only threatens food security, but also undermines the sustainability of marine ecosystem. The IOR is also have the territorial and maritime boundary dispute. This dispute can escalate tensions and have potential to trigger conflicts, posing a threat to regional stability. The vast expanses of the IOR provides ample opportunities for various forms of such as drug trafficking, arms smuggling, human trafficking, and counterfeit goods smuggling are rampant in the area. Next one would be environment challenges, as mentioned earlier also. Oil spill, pollution, and damage to maritime ecosystem are happening in the area. Next one would be the growing digitalizations and automations of maritime operations make it the sector is vulnerable to cyber attack. Coordinating humanitarian assistance and disaster release (HADR) effort is the aftermath of each of such event can be logistically challenging, especially in the region with limited infrastructure and resources. Geopolitical competition for influence, control, and access to resources in the region can also influence the regional dynamic and accurate security challenges in the area. The IOR, with the critical maritime route and economic significance, face a multitude of background threats and challenges to maritime security. After talking about the challenges, then we talk about how to enhance the maritime security corporations and develop the operating protocols. Among the GMC nations in the IOR is critical to maintaining the regional stability to ensure the safety of the maritime trades and navigation. These are some of the suggestions which will help to achieve this goal. Establish the regional information sharing center, creating a dedicated information center, which happened in this Singapore and also in Indian Ocean. This is a platform that can facilitate cooperations and coordinations. However, as we mentioned along, there are some restrictions of the country whether they want to join or not joining. So that one will be another story that we need to talk about. Utilizing the existing agreement as a template, leveraging existing regional agreements such as Code of Unplanned Encounter at Sea, CUES, as a template for developing standard operation procedure and rules of engagement and naval Coast Guard force in the IOR. Developing the standard SOP. This SOP should outline rules, responsibility, and procedure for different stakeholders, which is neighbor to each other. Engaging in multilateral exercises. These exercises promote interoperability and strengthen relationship among the regional navies. Leverage on international conventions, UNCLOS and the ISPS code as a guidance for maritime security and legal framework, which we spoke about earlier. Promoting confidence building measure. Implement confidence building measures such as regular dialogue, track 2 diplomacy, and naval hotlines to reduce tension and improve communication among the member states. Cooperating on counter-piracy and operations. This effort can be adopted to address piracy threat in the area. Enhance cybersecurity measures, develop and share best practices for enhancing cybersecurity in the maritime domain. Addressing the non-traditional security threat, which we mentioned earlier as well, explore reference point from the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, work on non-traditional challenge is some of the framework that we have to help us to mitigate this issue. Next one will be the strengthen the legal framework. Reference to IOR association efforts to develop a legal framework for maritime cooperations and safety will be the approach, one of the approach. Next one will be the engage of track 1 policy, involving high-level officials, policymakers, and diplomats in discussing and negotiation regarding maritime security cooperation will be another approach. Promoting public awareness and education, reference to regional initiative and awareness campaign that promote the importance of maritime security and environment protection in the IOR. And then regularly review and evaluate the effectiveness of the maritime security cooperation, which mentioned earlier. Then follow on will be environment protection protocols. Emphasize on the protection of maritime ecosystem and sustainable use of maritime resources. Engage regional think tanks. Seek input and policy recommendations from regional think tanks and research institute. Support regional initiative. Private sector engagement. Cooperate with the private sector, including shipping companies and maritime organizations. These suggestions can serve as a roadmap for enhancing maritime security cooperation and developing operating protocols among the nations in the IOR. Lastly, in conclusions, major global power have strategic interest in the IOR, leading to geopolitical competitions and the potential of proxy conflict. The country in the IOR must engage in various cooperation efforts, such as joint patrol, information sharing, and capacity building. Additionally, enhance to international maritime, including the United Nations UNCLOS, and play a crucial role in managing mitigate these challenges which I mentioned earlier. I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Admiral, for your informative presentation and thus providing us with a great deal of knowledge and understanding together with a lot of inputs. Let us now commence the next segment of the session, audience interaction. Just a soft reminder, please identify yourself and the name, the institution that you belong to, and be brief while asking your questions to the speakers. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. I am Captain Ritesh Suri. I am doing my Naval Higher Command at Naval War College, Goa. My question is to Professor Pant. So you had spoken about trust-based partnership as a fulcrum to collaboration. Akin to the oceans and seas as global commons, there is another global common where the boundaries are much blurred, and that is outer space. Through the Goa Maritime Conclave, sir, can we explore outer space ISR sharing based on mutual trust to act as a pillar to feed into the maritime strategy and thereby augmenting existing multilateral constructs and establishments such as the IFC-IOR? Your comments on that, sir. Thank you.
See, I think certainly, I don't see any conceptual problem in doing it, apart from the fact that the outer space remains, I think, even much more contested space domain than even the maritime at the moment. So as I think the nations are struggling, first of all, to get the first mover advantage in outer space, it's very difficult to even have the basic framework in place. And as you know, the discussions on outer space, as many of you would know, on trying to figure out a treaty response to the challenges in outer space, they are quite significant at the moment. So I would think it is much better that the maritime domain is first explored as an area of cooperation before bringing in much more contested domains into it. But broadly, I think as a matter of principle, I don't see any problem there.
I just want to add what the professor had mentioned. To my personal view is that when it comes to outer space security, not many players are capable of doing that outer space. So it's very limited players. We can look at maritime domain security concern as one of the template for us to work out in the area, but that would be the approach, like what I mentioned earlier, cooperating, joint patrol and whatever. That is on the maritime side. But for our space, it's a bit outreach to me. So it would be very challenging for non-player or non-capable nations to be in the area. So that's my comment. Thank you.
I'm Monty Khanna, NSCS. My question is again to Professor Harsh Pant. You spoke about the interlinkages between trust and institution building. Can you turn this argument on its head and say that the entire purpose of institutional building is that you insulate yourself from geopolitical ups and downs so that collaboration survives these crests and troughs, so to speak?
Yeah, I think I think the point that I was trying to raise, Admiral, was that I think intuitively that's the argument we make. But I think we have reached a point where a lot of the institutional frameworks seem to be collapsing because, despite being in place for a very long time, that fundamental trust quotient has not been able to be generated. And I think that is why you see and I think especially if you see big stakeholders, there the question is, can we bring major stakeholders before we develop a certain level of trust? I mean, I'm just raising this as a challenge to our thinking. While I agree with you that that's the argument of institution building is premised on what you have said, but I think what we are witnessing also is some challenge which is emerging to that idea that, look, we cannot, the institutions that are fundamentally among very disparate group of actors who do not share fundamental political trust amongst themselves, those institutions will not be able to survive the push and pull of what we are witnessing today in terms of geopolitics. So are we in that state where that fundamental level of trust is present and therefore you can create institutions? Or should we keep on relying on our understanding of institutions as a mechanism to build trust? I think I'm raising this question, and I feel that what has happened in the last few years allows for the possibility of some kind of a rethink on the original idea of institutions.
I would like to echo what Professor mentions. I just want to give us an example of ASEAN country perspective. How we look at it, we do have ADMM meetings from time to time, and in between regional, between like Malaysia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and bilateral, we also carry out regular meetings. So by having that kind of connection or that kind of relationship will definitely build trust between nation, between the regional context. So with that, that will help us to understand and build trust among us. Thank you.
Just a minute to add a few more points regarding the last question. I think this major players in such institutions need to play more active role, take initiative. The trust deficit will always be there, but we have to work to reduce it as much as possible. This zero error syndrome will never be there, so there will always be something. And the dialogue should be held regularly, and we need to take the decision makers and the politicians more and more on board to have these initiatives more effective. Thank you.
Professor Datesh Parulekar from Goa University. Professor Pant, since you spoke about a conceptual perspective, let me draw attention to a very important aspect, because we live in times of unbounded geographies, where geographies are essentially being cartographically reimagined. Now, one of the areas is connectivity corridors, because when we speak of seascape, I don't think we can speak of seascape by ignoring what's happening in landscape. So how do you look at this whole idea of connectivity corridors? For example, BIMSTEC had talked about in 2017 of a mountain economy and an ocean economy, and linking both of them. So how do you look at the hinterland and the littoral space, and how is that connecting and presenting challenges for, let's say, communities within the maritime domain? Thank you.
Thanks. I think that, essentially that was the point I was trying to make, that when you are, when you are looking at the geography as we know of the Indian Ocean region, it cannot be disconnected from the wider, reimagination of our strategic periphery, which is now the wider Indo-Pacific. And I think a lot of the conversations that we have had, we have brought in those wider institutions, wider dynamic in the region, whether it is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, ASEAN, BIMSTEC. They are looking at different aspects of Indian Ocean, but they are also now connecting a wider swathe of the maritime argument that we used to make. So Indian Ocean, when we used to talk of Indian Ocean as a zone of peace during the Cold War, it had a particular connotation depending on India's interests and depending on how India viewed its periphery. Today, when we talk of Indian Oceans, Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, it has a slightly different connotation in terms of the Indo-Pacific imagination of our periphery. And I think that also goes to this whole idea of, look, what is happening in Eurasia, for example, will have a bearing on how we think of what we can and cannot do in terms of our maritime space. And therefore, again, coming back to the essential question, that why trust becomes important is because those geographies and those, our strategic reimaginations are constantly being redrawn. We are constantly in the last, if you just look at the last decade, where we were a decade back and where we are today in terms of the kinds of conversations we are having, in terms of the kind of ideas that are on the table and the kinds of institutions that we are trying to draw, they are reflective of this wider trend of connecting these geographies and not looking them in silos. And that makes, I think, for a